Hello, welcome back to another fabulous video channel. I'm Jacob Videos Book Scorner. And today we're talking about, sadly, the 10 worst books of the year. Yeah, sadly. Actually, I have 5. We're going to break this up into a few different categories for you. So we have the 5 worst books I read this year. These are mostly 1-star reviews. I gave out 4, so we have 1 2-star review towards the very end. Then I have the most disappointing book I read this year, and then the most overhyped based on my personal rating and the rating that Goodreads has. So we'll talk about those ratings as well. I'll probably end up throwing them on the screen instead of comparing, just because I don't have them written down immediately in front of me. If you see me looking over to the side, I do have like a list pulled up on my laptop, just so I can have a much more clear understanding of the books that we're going to be talking about. Let me move over to my... yeah, something like that. So I want to mention, if these are some of your favorite books of all time, don't take offense. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to mention that none of these are in any specific order except for the last one because it was a 2-star. So technically it's like at the very, very bottom of this list. Everything else can go in between. And if I have any videos on any of these books, I'll link them probably down below, or I'll try to link them up in the cards. Let's get started. So the first one we're going to talk about is one that I definitely do have a video on. It's a reread video, and that is Diary of the Wimpy Kid. I think I said in that video that's probably my least favorite book of the year, and it still stands to this day as being one of my least favorite books of the year. One of the worst books of the year. Growing Up is a kid's book, and so I do feel somewhat guilty putting it on a list like this since I am 23, about to be 24, and I read it this year, and you know, it was a reread, so I loved it as a child. I read, I don't know, like 10 of them when I was younger, and then I didn't read any of them, obviously, because I grew up. And then I did this whole thing where I read Diary of the Kid, and I read the, Dork Diaries, book 1 as well, because they're representing 2 different audiences. I mean, Diary of the Kid, though, was a 1-star. This was a homophobic, misogynistic, bully-infused book. The main character is one of the most unlikable protagonists I've ever read from, and he's 12, so like good for him, he can grow. But I would say 2 of my biggest issues here, outside of like the misogynistic elements, which I can't really put my finger on at this very moment in time what those were, but I talk about them a lot in that review. In the homophobia, and there's like 2 clear moments, like there's a Christmas moment, there's like a moment after Christmas. I'm like, oh my god, that's yeah, okay, that's bad. 8 would be the bullying. This whole book is like an avocation. Our main character is bullied throughout most of the novel, and we're supposed to feel bad about him being bullied because he's being bullied. The issue is that he is also a bullier. He bullies his best friend throughout the entire book without 0 consequences. These bullies that could bully him get consequences, but he is like scot-free, which really just irked me the wrong way. I'm just not gonna lie to you. So that's Diary of the Kid, probably the worst book of the year that I read. There's a few others in here that are pretty good contenders, so I'll jump into that one next. The next one would be Clementine. Clementine might be worse. Might be worse. Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 4. This is based on that. This follows the events after Season 4, so I won't go into too much spoilery detail or too much detail here, because anything could be counted as a spoiler, because if you've not played the game, is one of the best endings of any series I've ever played. It's up there with like Uncharted and a few other ones that are just fucking phenomenal, and exactly the way it was supposed to. Is full circle from the very beginning, and the writers and the team that worked on that should feel extremely proud, and I just feel bad for them that this ever existed, because it just like took out so much, like it just ruined so much of what I loved. And I'm sure other people read this and are like, what is this garbage? Because like it follows Clementine after the events. She ends up leaving the group that she was a part of to go out on her own, which in a way sounds fine unless you know the actual story. This sounds like someone who is like, oh, I want to write a Walking Dead book. Ooh, let's use this character that's already like extremely popular and that people really love to sell my book, and that's what I'll do. And then don't read anything about it. It's like, you know, when Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness came out earlier this year, and Mike Waldron was like, I didn't watch the TV show WandaVision. And you're like, yeah, that makes completely sense. Where's Wanda? That's essentially what Clementine was for me as like as a fan. Those 2 are top contenders. The other ones are, it's fine. I'll get into the reasons why they're here. So then I read Freed. This is E.L. James's last book in the 50 Shades of Grey series. I highly doubt we are going to get some type of equivalent to like kids stories from her in this series, like following Anastasia and Kristen's children. But Freed is the third book in the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy written from Kristen's point of view, and personally, in my opinion, I do think Kristen's books are better than Anastasia's books. Anastasia's, I think 50 Shades Darker is still my favorite, as it's the most high octane out of them all. There's enough spice in it, with enough... Spice is always cringe, so like I don't really even count that. But there's enough spice in it with the mixture of like high octane action. Kristen's point of view is just more fascinating in my opinion. He's a much more complex character and much more original than Anastasia, because Kristen's based off of Edward, and by this point in the story, Edward didn't have his own point of view. He does now, Midnight Sun, but he didn't at this point, and so I felt much more original, which is probably why the writing is worse, right? It's still not great writing, but it's better. I don't know. It does seem like it's better. Either way, this is the third book. Obviously, this is after their things that happen. I don't want to get into too much spoilery detail in case you do want to read it. There are some surprises here. The problem is that the majority of this book takes place with him working at his work. Like, I'm going to say this book is like 900 pages, and the majority of it does take place in one setting, or it takes place over multiple settings, but it takes place under like one big conspiracy event that's going on, and it's just really, really boring to read from, and it takes up so much of the plot that like I just was like, this is horrible. It's like I gave it a 1. The last one star that I'm going to talk about here is Barbarian Alien. This is the sequel to a book I actually did not mind, surprisingly. Barbarian Princess or something along those lines. You guys know what this series is. Don't look at me like that. Don't give me that look. Yeah, I read them. Didn't you? I technically read the first 3. I don't think I reviewed the third or uploaded onto Goodreads. I guess I should probably do that. The first one, Barbarian Alien, I don't remember the first one's called, was good. It was enjoyable. It's about this group of girls. I'm going to explain what the premise is of the series so you guys understand. A group of girls end up being kidnapped, which is horrible. Horrible things happen to them, and they end up landing on this planet. Our main character in that one ends up finding this creature that's blue, and it's their unlikely love story. And then this one follows one of the friends from that book and their unlikely love story. The reason why I gave this one, maybe this is the third, the reason why I gave this one a 1 star, the first book had questionable sexual content in it, for sure. There are a few scenes that did not have consent in it, but it was so hard to explain. You have to read it to really understand why I'm like not saying that's like, it's a 2.5 out of 5 for sure, but it's not like a 1. This one had clear like, oh my god, you're gonna get like assaulted. There is no consent, and he does not care. And the author thought I would think that was hot, and I did not. And so it was a 1. The only 2 star that made the list here is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, my book talk video that I never posted because like I hated this book so much that I was like, yeah, Jacob, don't do that. It's fine. I think Colleen Hoover and I are just not good compatible people, you know what I mean? I'm so happy that it's not the winner of the Goodreads Choice Awards, where I would have to talk about it more fully in detail in that video that's coming up next month or 2 months from now, depending on how much time I have. It Ends With Us is one of, it's so annoying. And interestingly enough, I saw a video that Kayla just did. She does this like romance thing. I think we all know about it by this point in our lives. And she had talked about Colleen Hoover in her last one and she talked about how It Ends With Us is like not a romance, but an extremely empowering story about abuse and overcoming abuse. And when you look at it that way, I think it makes more sense and more logical sense. But the issue here is that the book is presented as a romance. Romance is one of the worst romance I've ever read in my entire life. To be fair, I didn't like either of the protagonist's like love interests. I also did not really care for the protagonist at all. And Colleen Hoover has this way of writing characters that are younger, either speaking who seem older or older characters that seem younger. I don't know why she can't match that one up. And also, it's also very, what's the word here that I'm looking for? Unrealistic is the word I'll go with. Like, our main character, it has a job in marketing when she's 23. No, you don't. Like, she's that executive marketer. No, you don't. It's impossible. It's just not reality. But, like, it's just not really realistic. And then she jumps into a flower business without any expertise because she likes flowers. Yet, she doesn't know how to take care of flowers. I understand a book has a hijinks, but that's too much hijinks. It did not work with me. The only reason why I got a 2 and not a 1 was because of the ending, and I don't want to spoil anything here, but it is a really good ending. I would never want to read the sequel. Honestly, I don't want to read it at all. And I think this is where I part with Colleen Hoover, as I'm pretty sure she's been on the worst list for the past 3 years in a row. So, sorry, Colleen. We're done. Until she releases another horror novel, and then I get enticed and I'll read it. So I guess you'll see me again next year. Hi! Alright, let's move over to the superlatives. The superlatives I only have 2 for. Obviously, I have my most disappointing book and the most overhyped book. Most overhyped, though, we'll go jump into that one first, and we'll save most disappointing for the last. Only because most overhyped are 2 books we already talked about, so like I can just talk about them right now. So the first one is Freed by James Freed. It has a very high rating score. It's like a 3.75, 3.85 or something like that. And obviously I gave it a 1. That makes it overhyped in my opinion. Then we have the actual most overhyped book on this list, and then it ends with Us. And it's probably the most overhyped book I read this entire year. This has so many ratings. It has such a high rating at that. It's like a 4 or something along those lines. It's crazy. And I gave it a 2 with an asterisk of like a 1.75. You know what I mean? So that's why we're just going to wrap that up really quickly. If you have It Ends With Us, because I know that's going to be polarizing, it's definitely going to be in the thumbnail, do not, under any circumstances, come at me. Because, like, just because it didn't work for me does not mean it didn't work for you. Okay, my most disappointing, which does suck and it's quite sad, is Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas. It's actually just sitting right there, but I don't feel like getting it. So I guess it's up here now. Yeah, no, editing Jacob's gonna hate me. Tower of Dawn is book 7 in the Throne of Glass series. And I ended up rating it a 3.25 stars, which is the lowest rated book in the entire Throne of Glass series that I read so far. I've not read King of Ash, so maybe that'll take the cake next year. But with Tower of Dawn, this was particularly just boring. I think I just learned some of my taste with this book, and we're going to talk about that instead. It's most disappointing. I think it's a lot of people's most disappointing book in the series and stuff, and I was really hoping to come in here and be like, oh my god, Tower of Dawn is like a 5-star read. Because if you guys have not been following me while reading these, why not? I have so many videos talking about the Throne of Glass series. You should totally check them out. The problem that came down to with Tower of Dawn is that I just don't love a political fantasy novel. I'm much more into like a little bit of politicalness, lots of romance, mostly act, which I would say is the majority of the rest of the Throne of Glass series, so that's great. And I'm sure like King of Ash will be very politicized, but there's gonna be enough action and stuff hopefully in between those scenes that it doesn't matter. Sarah J. Maas, if you did not realize or did not know, ends up writing her info dumpy things in dialogue, which is fine throughout most of the series because you don't really pick up on it. I just read a comment and that's how I was like, oh my god, you're so correct. But you don't really pick up on it, and then it happens, and you're like, in this book, they're only having conversations. There's like 4 or 5 action sequences in the entire thing. Everything else is just conversations, and you're like, oh my god, this is a lot of info dumping, Sarah. And I understand, it's a whole new world that we're visiting, a new continent. It also takes place under Kale's point of view, which if you read the series, you understand what that means. I was never a Kale hater. I definitely jumped ships really early on in like the romance cap. But like I was never a Kale hater, and I never thought that would deter me from here. And it's just the fact that he's just not a very interesting protagonist. I think in that video I specifically said something out of the lines, which is I don't think up yet, but I specifically said out of the lines of something. Kale is a great love interest, a great foil character, a great supporting character, a horrible main character, and I stand for that. So, and guys, that's my worst books of the year. That's the list I have for you. Let me know if what you read that was horrible. Once again, I went through and I didn't pick out books that like were truly like that I despised or that were despicable or anything along those lines. I didn't do that. I picked out I picked from my numbers. I did it analytically because I think a worst list is kind of like pointless and stuff, and ultimately none of these books that I won't get. Clementine, maybe. Everything else, not that bad, okay? Like, you can enjoy what you enjoy. If you enjoy this book, sure, why not? Just look at the problems, okay? But, Jacob, stop it. And so, I didn't want to come in here and be like, oh my god, these are the worst books. This one was a 4-star, but it's still on this list. No, that logically doesn't make sense. The 1 stars to belong here. And then it ends with Us. I wanted to talk about in some capacity on the channel. And it did fit with this list because I absolutely hated it while reading it up until the last 2%. That's this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't comment down below. Hit subscribe. I'll see you all next time for another beautiful video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.